A flight from Jakarta to Sydney, a full passenger list, no reports of anything unusual, but when Flight QX317 landed, one seat was empty. Sarah Halim had boarded the plane. Witnesses saw her. Surveillance footage confirmed it. But somewhere, mid-flight, she vanished, without a trace, no luggage, no passport stamp, no explanation. How does a person disappear from a moving airplane? And why, weeks later, did her fiancé receive a chilling voice message saying, "Don't look for me, it's too late"? This is the story of the Vanishing Passenger, and the terrifying truth hidden at 30,000 feet. It was supposed to be an ordinary flight, Jakarta to Sydney, a route taken by thousands every year. Among the passengers on Flight QX317 was 32-year-old Sarah Halim, a rising finance executive with a bright future. She had just closed a major deal in Indonesia and was heading back to Australia, where she lived with her fiancé, Daniel Carter. Sarah had called Daniel from the airport, telling him she would be home by morning, but she never made it. Sometime during the 6-hour flight, Sarah Halim disappeared. When Flight QX317 landed in Sydney, passengers collected their bags, stretched after the long flight, and walked toward the exit. But as the crew performed their final checks, something unusual was noted. Seat 14A was empty. It wasn't just that Sarah was missing, it was as if she had never been there at all. Her carry-on luggage was gone. Her passport had not been stamped. Even the in-flight meal assigned to her seat had vanished. Yet her boarding pass showed she had checked in, gone through security, and boarded the flight. The flight crew was baffled. No one had reported anything strange, no disturbances, no signs of struggle, nothing. But Sarah Halim was gone. Authorities in both Indonesia and Australia launched an immediate investigation. The first theory was simple. Sarah had never actually boarded the flight. Perhaps she had checked in but left the airport before departure. But surveillance footage told a different story. Security cameras captured Sarah entering the departure lounge, going through customs, and walking toward the gate. The final footage showed her stepping onto the plane, her dark brown suitcase in hand, but there was something odd about the recording. In the last frame, just before Sarah disappeared from view, she glanced over her shoulder, as if someone was following her. And then, she was gone. The flight attendants were questioned repeatedly. None of them remembered anything unusual. The passenger in seat 14B, a businessman named Alex Nolan, claimed he had spoken to Sarah briefly before takeoff. She had smiled at him, put on her headphones, and leaned against the window. That was the last time he saw her. One flight attendant recalled seeing Sarah asleep after the first hour of the flight, but when they did the final seat check before landing, she was gone. The question was impossible to ignore. How could a passenger vanish from a moving plane? Authorities combed through the flight manifest, comparing it with passport records. That's when they discovered something strange. One name on the passenger list didn't match any Australian or Indonesian immigration records. The name belonged to David Langford, a man with no registered travel history, no identification records, and no trace beyond that one flight. Even more chilling, David Langford had been assigned the seat directly behind Sarah Halim, but according to the crew, no one had occupied that seat. As investigators dug deeper into Sarah's life, they uncovered a disturbing detail. 2 weeks before her disappearance, she had sent an email to a private investigator in Sydney. The subject line read, "They know where I am." The contents of the email were brief. "If something happens to me, it wasn't an accident. Look into the company. The flight will be my last chance to leave." The email was sent at 3:17 a.m., an odd hour for a woman known to be meticulous and structured. Her fiancé, Daniel, was questioned about it, but he was just as confused as everyone else. Sarah had never mentioned anything about being in danger. Then another discovery was made. Sarah's company, Titan Global Finance, had been under investigation for financial fraud. Had she uncovered something she wasn't supposed to? Among the passengers on Flight QX317 was an undercover air marshal. He was off duty, but had been seated near Sarah. When authorities finally tracked him down, he revealed something disturbing. During the flight, he'd seen Sarah get up to use the restroom. She never returned to her seat. He assumed She had switched seats or moved toward the back of the plane. But now, he realized, he had been the last person to see her before she vanished. By now, the case had attracted international media attention. People speculated about every possible scenario. Had Sarah been kidnapped mid-flight? Had she been forced into hiding? Was she even still alive? Then another twist emerged. Sydney airport officials reviewed the security footage from the plane's arrival. Every passenger was accounted for, except for Sarah Halim. The footage showed passengers disembarking row by row, row 13, row 14, row 15. Sarah's seat was clearly visible, but no one left. From seat 14A, a sudden reappearance? Days after Sarah's disappearance, Daniel received a message from an unknown number. It was a voice recording, distorted, as if it had been altered. "Daniel, don't look for me. It's too late." Authorities traced the signal. It had originated from an abandoned building in Jakarta. But when they arrived, all they found was a single object resting on the floor: Sarah's boarding pass. The investigation took a dark turn when a journalist uncovered a link between Titan Global Finance and a powerful international network, one known for making people disappear. Sarah had been right. She had uncovered something deadly, and someone had made sure she would never reveal the truth. But if she was gone, who had sent the message? Months passed with no new leads. The case was considered unsolved, a chilling mystery that defied logic. Then, a final piece of evidence surfaced. A technician at Sydney Airport was reviewing backup data from Flight QX317 when he found something unusual: deleted footage. When restored, the video showed the interior of the plane mid-flight. It was grainy, low resolution, but clear enough to see movement. At exactly 2:47 a.m., Sarah Halim got up from her seat. She walked toward the back of the plane, and then she vanished, not out of sight, not into a restroom. One frame she was there. The next, she was gone. The footage of Sarah's disappearance was immediately classified. Australian authorities, in cooperation with Indonesian intelligence, launched a covert investigation. How could someone vanish in mid-air? The only explanation was chilling. Sarah hadn't disappeared by accident. Someone had removed her. A week after the footage surfaced, an anonymous email was sent to an Australian news outlet. Attached was a document labeled Project Phoenix Execution Protocol. The details were horrifying. Project Phoenix wasn't a financial fraud scheme. It was a highly classified operation designed to eliminate individuals who threatened powerful global interests, and Sarah Halim was their latest target. With this new revelation, investigators revisited the passenger list. The name David Langford, the man assigned to the seat behind Sarah, was still a mystery. Then, a forensic analyst made a shocking discovery. The name David Langford had appeared before, on 3 separate flights. Each time, it was linked to a missing person. No body, no explanation, just gone. Whoever David Langford was, he wasn't an ordinary passenger. He was a ghost, a phantom operative, and his latest mission was Sarah Halim. Just when the case seemed impossible to solve, a new witness emerged, a flight attendant from Flight QX317, terrified, paranoid, but willing to talk. She revealed something she had been too afraid to mention before. Hours before takeoff, a man had approached her at the boarding gate. He had shown her credentials that looked official but felt off. His instructions were simple: ignore the woman in seat 14A. She had been too nervous to question it at the time, but now she knew. She had been part of a cover-up. With this new information, authorities searched Flight QX317. The aircraft had already been in service for weeks since Sarah's disappearance, but there was one place that hadn't been thoroughly checked: the cargo hold. Hidden behind a false panel, they found something chilling: a small, enclosed compartment, just big enough for a person. Inside, they found a fingerprint. It matched Sarah Halim. She hadn't vanished into thin air. She had been taken. Now that authorities knew Sarah had been hidden in the plane, they traced the aircraft's maintenance records. One name stood out: Anton Wijaya, Anton was a former airline technician with a history of unexplained travel patterns, but when authorities went to question him, they found his apartment ransacked. Anton was dead. A single message had been left on his computer screen. Stop digging. 3 months after Sarah's disappearance, Daniel received another message. This time, it wasn't a recording, it was a video. The footage was dark and grainy, but as the screen adjusted, Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Sarah. She was alive. Her face was pale, her eyes darting in fear. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Daniel, listen to me. They don't want you to find me. They think they erased me, but I found a way to send this. You have to stop looking. They're watching you too. Please, forget me. And then, just before the screen went black, one final phrase. They're not who you think they are. The Vanishing Passenger? Unsolved or just beginning? The video was traced to a remote server in Eastern Europe, but no further leads emerged. Sarah Halim was still missing, and whoever had taken her had covered their tracks perfectly. The case was eventually closed. Officially, she was presumed dead. But Daniel never stopped searching, because somewhere out there, Sarah Halim was still alive, and she knew something the world was never meant to hear. Daniel refused to accept defeat. He knew Sarah was alive. He knew she had left that final message for a reason. But he also knew one thing for certain. Whoever had taken her would never let her go. Years passed. The world forgot about Sarah Halim, but Daniel never did. He followed every lead, traced every whisper, and uncovered one undeniable truth. Project Phoenix wasn't just real. It was bigger than anyone had imagined. And then one night, his phone rang. A distorted voice spoke, "You're looking in the wrong place. She's not running. She's hiding." Before he could respond, the call disconnected. But the number, it traced back to a remote village in Romania. Daniel traveled to Romania under a false identity. He arrived in a forgotten town, surrounded by thick forests and an eerie silence. Deep in the woods, he found an old monastery, long abandoned. Inside, hidden beneath layers of dust and secrecy, was her, Sarah Halim. She was thinner, her eyes older, but it was her. She barely spoke at first, as if she had forgotten how. But then, finally, she whispered, "I had to disappear before they made me disappear for good." Sarah had faked her own death, using the very tactics Project Phoenix had mastered. She had become a ghost to escape the ghosts hunting her. But now that Daniel had found her, she had a choice: stay hidden or fight back. For years, Sarah and Daniel worked in the shadows, exposing the organization that had nearly erased her. Whistleblowers emerged, secret files were leaked, governments were forced to acknowledge what had long been denied. Project Phoenix fell, and with it, the people who had orchestrated Sarah's disappearance. One by one, those responsible were arrested or fled into hiding, but Sarah had no interest in revenge, only in freedom. One evening, as the sun set over the Romanian hills, Daniel and Sarah sat outside the monastery, watching the sky. For the first time in years, Sarah smiled. "I don't have to run anymore," she said. Daniel looked at her, knowing she was right. The fight was over. "No," he said, "you don't." And with that, the story of the Vanishing Passenger finally came to an end. But the legend of Sarah Halim, the woman who disappeared only to return stronger than ever, would never be forgotten.